Good morning. My name is Usha Rao-Monari. I'm the Associate Administrator at the United Nations Development Program. I've been the UNDP Associate Administrator since April of this year, and it is a phenomenal and very, very interesting job. One of the areas that I cover, of course, includes water and all the impacts that water has on economies around the world. Before this, I was part of the Blackstone Group, where I headed their water platform at that time. Later, I became a senior advisor to their infrastructure fund. But again, a lot of my career was around water there. Before that, I spent many years at the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group, doing various things, but I ended up the last, say, 10, 15 years, again in the infrastructure sector with a focus on water and energy and other parts of basic service infrastructure that exist world over. You know, water has always been a subject that interested me, and I did not get the opportunity to look at it or to study it or indeed to invest in it until I got to the International Finance Corporation. Why is water so interesting? Many people say water is life. It is. Water is dignity. Indeed, it is. But water is also economics. Water is also finance. Water is also growth and prosperity. Because without water, none of those things are possible. So I've always been looking at water from the sidelines. When I got the opportunity in IFC, I took it with great joy at the time. At IFC, I was looking globally, not at the United States, but globally. And I found that this was an infrastructure asset class, if I may label it as such, that was just not getting finance as was required, nor was it getting innovation, honestly, as was required. It was honestly a sector world over, and by the way, including here in the United States, that was stuck in the 1800s almost. If you look at water networks around the world, many of them date back to the 1800s, which, honestly, when you think about infrastructure in general, that is quite surprising. So I took on the job of running IFC's water business, connected to the energy business and other infrastructure areas, but mostly the water business. And I found a few things of interest. Up until then, pretty much, the attention was on water access or WASH, or, there's different labels to it, but it was around getting clean water and indeed sanitation to the largest number of people. Access is obviously very important because even now, in 2021, there are 800 million people around the world who don't have access to clean water and proper sanitation. Actually, there's 2.5 billion who don't have access to proper sanitation. So the issue then becomes that we have to do something on the access side. But as I started looking at it with partners outside of IFC, even including the private sector, we realized that there was another issue that people were not taking into consideration, and that is really water security, the availability of clean water even. The issue of climate change on the water systems around the world. What was happening there? So I actually got together with a group of partners. We published a report called Charting Our Water Future. And in doing that, we set up a new entity at the time. This was back in, 2009, 2010, an entity called the 2030 Water Resources Group, which was looking at the issue of water security as it linked to growth and prosperity around the world. It's a very successful entity now. It's part of the World Bank Group. And I won't say any more except to say that that was one of the first entities that explicitly looked at, considered, analyzed, and tried to find solutions to the issue of water security, in addition to water access. I'm now at the UNDP, as it's known, and here also we're looking at access to basic services around the world. As you all know, the pandemic has just exacerbated the pressure on economies and pressure on people and pressure on planet when it comes to access to natural resources, of which water is a very important one. And so we are doing a lot of work with our country partners and other partners around the world to see how to ensure water and energy access, as well as look at water resource security in many, many countries that are today affected by the negative effects of climate change and drought and floods and whatnot. I feel very honored to be here in this position at the UNDP. I think that where the world is right now, still unfortunately in the pandemic, with perhaps a hope that we will eventually get out of it, but at a point of the world's life cycle where there is an imbalance at various levels. There's an imbalance between people and the planet. There is an imbalance between the haves and the have-nots, and there is an imbalance between access and no access at all. And I think that the UN system in general, but UNDP in specific, is hoping to provide solutions in an intentionally inclusive way to people and the planet to recreate and regain that balance. And I think that's why I'm so excited to be here with my colleagues, with our country partners, with other partners around the world to look at these issues. Another observation that I have made over the last 10, 15 years that I've been looking at this sector, and that is around the fact that on many levels, it is easy, not easy, that's a difficult word, but it is easier to raise pools of money, right, for a purpose. So I have seen various people talk about funds for water and, pools of money, blended finance, what have you, to finance the water and the broader water sector. The issue becomes really, where are you going to put the money once you raise it? And that is something that I started thinking about, not only in the emerging markets, but even in the United States, really. Even if you raise $1 billion for water, do we have the pipeline of bankable deals that we can put water into? And the answer, sadly, is no. So I guess it was 3-4 years ago, I got together with a couple of like-minded partners and experts in the US water sector to set up something we call the Water Finance Exchange. And the mandate, the purpose, the objective, the aspiration, if you will, of WFX is to create a pipeline of bankable water projects and water deals in the United States. And doing that through connecting various stakeholders, whether it's a government stakeholder, private sector, civil society, putting them together around a table to figure out how do you make a pipeline of projects? How do you create one that is fundable, but also sustainable and fits into the green recovery that the world is looking at? And so the Water Finance Exchange, I think, is one of the most important sort of developments that the US water sector could see. We have a group of philanthropic partners with us that we're proud and honored to have. And I think that, ever since I moved to the UNDP, unfortunately, I cannot continue working on the Water Finance Exchange, but I know that it is doing very well and is very well along the path of creating a pipeline of projects. If you take a step back, and I'd like to do that right now, beyond these instruments, whether it's the 2030 Water Resources Group, the Water Finance Exchange, and many, many, many others, the issue of water has become even more important now than ever before. And that is because of the phenomenon of climate change that is engulfing the planet. As you know, even in the United States, there are areas of water drought, of lakes shrinking, of rivers declining in water levels, and so on and so forth. And when you look at that, and around the world, it's just as bad. When you look at that, you have to step back and you have to say, what else can we do? What else can we do to prevent complete catastrophe? The other thing that I have looked at and thought about is why? Around the world, but not just in the United States, why is it that there's not enough finance coming into the sector. If you look at global financial flows into infrastructure globally, including the United States, by the way, but globally, you will find that less than 10% of total financing flows to infrastructure, I think around 7 or 8%, go to water and sanitation. And that is just not good, because what does that result in? It results in the fact that existing water systems around the world are not renewed, they're not renovated, they have almost ceased providing the services for which they were established. And on the other hand, large parts of the world, including some parts of this country actually, don't have the appropriate systems, whether centralized or decentralized, to harness the water resource, even if they have it. So those two things are creating a situation in the water sector where access is still an issue and security is becoming a larger issue. So when you look back at these, what are the instruments that we can put in place? And one of the pathways to solutions in the global water sector is innovation, new technologies, new business models. How do we do things differently than they were done in the 1800s or early 1900s and so on and so forth? How do we do things in a way that an expanding and rapidly expanding population that is becoming rapidly more remote through urbanization and rural area development and so on, how do you make sure that they have access to clean water and sanitation, and that they're not running out of clean water? So that has, I think, innovation, new technologies have become areas that the water sector has to look at. The issue, though, and I'd like to put this out there, is that there's still a conservatism around using new technologies. Rightly so, because we're dealing with the essence of life when it comes to water. So you want to make sure that whatever technological advances, technologies that you put in place are safe, are sustainable, and are inclusive. So in that sense, it's important to be cautious. It's important to be thoughtful and careful about innovation, but you can't ignore it. And my plea is that more innovation comes into the sector, whether it is innovation in actual water technologies, whether it is innovation in business model, in governance model, in policies, in financial instruments. All these have to come into the water sector in order to create a situation where the access issue and the water security or water availability issue are addressed. Finally, I know that a lot of people ask me, hey, water is a very, gender specific, male sector. How did you survive in this sector all this time? My thought is the following. If you look around the world and you look at water access and you look at who in a given family unit is the one worrying about providing water for their family or even for their community, it is women. If you look at emerging markets, it is women who walk miles to the water source to bring water back for their families. And so I think that when you take that model and you put it forward in terms of policy making, in terms of creating new financial instruments, I think it is important for women to engage with their sensibilities, their knowledge that water is life, that water is dignity and water is hope, in order to be intentionally inclusive in creating an ecosystem where water is available to all and water security concerns are no longer as heavy as they are today. I thank you.